order. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to meeting number 22 of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development of the House of Commons. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development on Tuesday, September 23, 2025, and the motion adopted by the Subcommittee on Monday, May 25, 2026, the Subcommittee is meeting for its briefing on human rights in the Caribbean region. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the standing order. Members may participate in person or via the Zoom application.
Few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, floor, English, French or auxiliary. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I
would now like to welcome our first panel of witnesses.
From ACLED, Tiziano Breda, Senior Analyst, Latin America and Caribbean. She is with us by video conference. Madame Sandra Pellegrini, Senior Analyst, Latin America and Caribbean, also by video conference. From Little Footprint, Big Step, Mr. Morgan Weinberg, co-founder and executive director by video conference. From United Nations Children's Funds, Madame Rebecca Davidson, Chief Programs Officer, and Madame Gita Narayan from UNICEF, representative in Haiti. Welcome to you all. Every one of you will have 5 minutes for introduction, and I would like to start with Madame Tiziano Breda. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Madame Sandra Pellegrini, please.
Mr. Chair, honorable member, thank you for the opportunity to provide our assessment or armed conflict location and event data, an independent, impartial global monitors that collects, analyzes, and maps data on conflict and protests. Today, I will provide an assessment drawing on active data in 2018. Since 2021, the security situation has deteriorated year after year. ACLED data shows that between 2021 162%, and we record over 1,700 violent incidents and 4,700 fatalities last year alone. The assassinations of President Jovenel Moïse accelerated the breakdown of an already unstable political order and disrupted pre-existing relationship between gangs and members of the country's political and economic elite. From their political backers by diversifying their sources of revenue, which include kidnappings for ransom, extortions, and taking control of strategic roads and infrastructures. Gangs have further and leverage over political authority.
Excuse me, Madame Pellegrini, due to a technical problem I would like to suspend a few moments until we arrange this problem. And you will restart from the top, from the beginning. Suspension. Now we would like to start with with Madame Morgan Weinberg to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While the world watches, gangs funded by political and affluent individuals have continued to expand their control, crimes, and destruction within Haiti. The country is intentionally being kept in a state of political instability and has not had a formal election since 2016. Gang members are recording and openly sharing sexual assault, abuse, destruction of landmarks and hospitals, and massacres through social media platforms, causing psychological damage and intimidation beyond their physical reach. As a result, increased violence is evident among children and adults across the country. Prolonged stress and instability has deeply affected the mental health of Haitian communities, even in areas not directly affected by gang violence. Over 1 million people in Haiti have been displaced due to the violence, with over half of that number being children. These internally displaced families have been left homeless and unemployed in a state of extreme vulnerability. Meanwhile, years of exponential inflation has left the cost of living unattainable for the majority of the population. So over 5 million people in Haiti are facing acute hunger. Amidst this homelessness and famine, each year, Haiti experiences heavy rains and flooding. Child trafficking has been a major concern, not only in Port-au-Prince, but also in rural regions of Haiti, where children are reportedly disappearing and street children are being forcibly recruited. The amount of children who've become involved in armed gangs in Haiti is extremely alarming, and children in vulnerable communities or in the streets are being bribed or trafficked and forced to become child soldiers. Once they've joined the armed gangs, it's dangerous for these children to leave. Girls are also being used by armed gangs for forced domestic labor and for sexual exploitation. Orphanage relocation has increased the risk of long-term family separation and trafficking for many children. The majority of orphanages in the country are operating illegally, yet child protection authorities and partners lack the resources to facilitate family reunification for the thousands of children living in these neglectful and often abusive institutions. Sexual assault cases have skyrocketed, yet a weak justice system puts both survivors and advocates at risk. Meanwhile, the child protection actors who respond to such cases are severely under-resourced, as UNICEF and other major stakeholders are underfunded. Medical facilities are under-resourced when it comes to both human resources and supplies. Hospitals are challenging for people to reach due to gang control of major roads and challenging to afford once they can be reached. Many medical professionals are having to flee gunfire while saving lives and are being targeted for kidnappings. My recommendations for the committee are, first of all, to support the decentralization of services and economic opportunities in Haiti by building the capacity of regional offices and facilities, by supporting the development of the country's agricultural industry, and by utilizing infrastructure development to create employment for Haitians. Second of all, I urge Canada to prioritize funding child protection initiatives to respond to and prevent the extreme vulnerability, famine, homelessness, child trafficking, and sexual assault cases, while ensuring that children are supported within their families and that separation is avoided. Finally, urgent intervention is required to address the involvement of children in armed gangs in Haiti, which must be addressed both by providing supports for the reintegration of child soldiers and street children safely into society, as well as through prevention, through reinforcement of vulnerable families. Thank you.
And now I would like to invite Madame Gita Narayan to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, honorable members. Thank you once again for the opportunity for UNICEF to appear before the subcommittee today to speak to the situation in Haiti. My name is Geetha Narayan, and I am the representative of UNICEF in Haiti for the last 2 years. First, allow me to say that Canada has been an important partner to UNICEF in Haiti. Over the past 5 years, Canada has supported UNICEF programs across health, nutrition, water and sanitation, immunization, and child protection with approximately 32 million Canadian dollars. This support has made a practical difference, but the scale of the current triple crisis is increasing faster than the response. Haiti is experiencing a political crisis, a security crisis, and a humanitarian crisis. From UNICEF's perspective, it is also a child protection crisis. In Haiti today, around 1.47 million people are internally displaced, including over 751,000 girls and boys. Each displacement increases the risk of family separation, exploitation, violence, disease, psychological distress, and prolonged interruption of learning. Today, nearly 1 in 2 Haitians requires humanitarian assistance. Violence and displacement are disrupting children's access to education, healthcare, protection, and other essential services, as 90% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, is under the control of armed groups. Children are increasingly exposed to violence. UNICEF reported earlier this year that the recruitment and use of children by armed groups increased dramatically by an estimated 200% in 2025 alone. Girls face heightened risks of sexual violence, exploitation, forced association with armed actors, and stigma when they return to their communities, while boys are facing recruitment, detention, and exposure to armed violence. The systems meant to protect children are under extreme pressure. Violence, displacement, poverty, and migration are tearing families apart, while schools, health facilities, water and sanitation systems, social services, justice services, and child protection actors are struggling to function. I recently visited Sermicol, a detention center which is supposed to have a capacity of 100 children. Today, it holds around 100 children, many in prolonged pretrial detention, alongside approximately 600 adults. The conditions were deeply alarming. Since the handover protocol was signed in January 2024, UNICEF, the Haitian government, and civil society partners have verified and supported more than 600 children associated with armed groups with specialized protection and reintegration services. Canada's support to the Pré Jeune program is helping to prevent recruitment, support safe release, and provide psychosocial care, education, and reintegration of these children. During a visit to a transit center in Port-au-Prince a few weeks ago, I met Alexandre, a 14-year-old boy who had fled violence at home, lived on the streets, and was later used by an armed group to collect information. His story illustrates how easily children can be drawn into exploitation when protection systems break down. But humanitarian action alone cannot resolve this crisis. Children need protection now, and they need systems that can endure. What we need to do is clear. First, child protection must remain at the center of engagement on Haiti, including discussions related to security support. International security assistance should include child protection safeguards, mandatory training on child rights for all members of security forces, such as the Gang Suppression Force, measures to prevent and respond to sexual exploitation and abuse, and safe handover procedures for children encountered during security operations. Second, we need to sustain flexible humanitarian and development funding. Continued investment in education, health, water, social services, and community-based protection is essential to prevent a lost generation of Haitian children. Third, we must continue to support Haitian-led solutions. Throughout this crisis, Haitian institutions, local organizations, women's groups, youth groups, and community actors have remained on the front lines responding to the needs of children. Strengthening their capacity, leadership, and long-term resilience is essential to any sustainable solution. Mr. Chair, honorable members, the crisis in Haiti is often described through insecurity, but for children it is measured in missed school days, untreated illnesses.
Please, 10 more seconds to go because time is...
Yep. unsafe water, forced displacement, recruitment fear, and the loss of their childhood. Canada has been an important partner to Haiti, and today I ask you to continue that engagement with a clear focus on children's rights, protection, accountability, and support to Haitian systems and communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Mr. Tiziano Breda to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to provide our assessment on the situation in Haiti. I, together with my colleague Sandra, and event data, an independent, impartial global monitor that collects, analyzes, and maps data on conflict and protest. Today, we will provide an assessment drawing on ACLED data, including 2018. Since 2021, the security situation has deteriorated year after year. ACLED data show that between 2021 and 2025, violence levels increased by 162%, and we record over 1,700 violent incidents and 4,700 fatalities last year alone. The assassination of President Jovenel Moïse accelerated the breakdown of an already unstable political order and disrupted pre-existing relationships between gangs and members of the country's political and economic elites. The result, gangs have gained greater autonomy from their political backers by diversifying their sources of revenue, which include kidnapping for ransom, extortion, and taking control of strategic roads and infrastructure. Gangs have further sought to expand their territorial influence to bolster their resources and leverage over political authorities. They have expanded within the Port-au-Prince metropolitan area, but also beyond the capital, including in other parts of the West Department and in regions further north into Artibonite and Centre. While gangs continue to compete for control of specific neighborhoods and territories, they've increasingly acted in coordination under the Vivant San coalition. This transitional authorities more directly and respond collectively.
Ça fait 2 fois malheureusement que l'interprète me souligne.
Unfortunately, now it has been twice that the interpreters have indicated that the sound is cutting out. So maybe check. Yes. But the problem is that we can't keep suspending every minute. We have to live with this because we don't have enough time. Yes, but the problem that we have is not because I want to interrupt the witness. It's because our interpreters have to be able to interpret, and we have rules to follow with regard to safety and security of the interpreters. And it's not to interrupt the witness.
séance.
Let's begin once again, and the interpreters agreed to continue.
Mr. Breda, you have the floor. You could continue.
I was saying, while gangs continue to compete for control of specific neighborhoods and territories, they've increasing coalition. This has allowed them to join forces to challenge transitional authorities more directly and respond collectively to heightened security pressure, including the deployment of the international security forces, such as the Multinational Security Support Mission, now replaced by the Gang Suppression Force. Haitian security forces and international partners stepped up the security response in 2025, including by establishing a special task force that has relied on explosive-laden drones, with assistance from private military company Vectus Global to target gangs. Although heightened anti-gang operations have produced some tactical gains, such as the recent recovery of areas in Certal Port-au-Prince, these gains have remained limited and fragile. The Haitian National Police is overstretched and under-resourced, and the Gang Suppression Force is not yet fully operational. The operations thus far have showed limited success in capturing gang leaders or dismantling their operations and structures, as gangs seem to be adapting by seeking less exposure or even expanding or seeking refuge in other regions. Civilians are often caught in the crossfire, particularly amid the recent use of drone strikes against gangs. The incidents with drones that killed over 900 people, including civilians and children. These incidents raise serious concerns, especially in densely populated areas, as well as broader questions over the extrajudicial killing of suspected gangs. Civilian population is continuously targeted by gangs through killings, large-scale massacres, sexual violence, kidnappings for ransom, forced recruitment, and forced displacement. In the past 12 months alone, ACLED records the killing of around 1,000 people in violence targeting civilians, and nearly 5 million Haitians, or about 46% of the population, have been exposed to expansion and territorial control continue to disrupting Haiti's main logistical arteries and obstructing the transport of essential medicine and food, which exacerbates already severe levels of food insecurity. At the same time, most hospitals in the capital have also been forced to close because of gang violence. Faced with limited protection from the state,
can you wrap it out 10 more seconds, please?
Yeah. Many have organized into self-defense brigades. Local communities often see these groups as last line of defense, but the surge in vigilante activity the broader political consequence is that insecurity continues to obstruct the organization of elections, which have not been held in the country for a decade. But security operations alone are unlikely to solve Haiti's crisis. They need to go hand in hand with strengthening.
Okay, thank you. Time is over. We passed for almost 1 minute. And now we would like to go for the first round of question and answer. I would like to invite Mr. Davis to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm hoping that that the connection would be strong enough that we can get some answers to some of the questions. But Haiti today represents one of the most severe cases of state fragility in the Western Hemisphere. The crisis goes well beyond gangs and political instability. Haiti is experiencing the erosion of the very institutions that sustain a functioning society, from schools, courts, public services, economic opportunity, and trust in the government itself. I'd like to ask Ms. Pellegrini, I'd like to explore the relationship between economic exclusion and institutional decline. In your view, to what extent does Haiti's current instability driven by chronic economic exclusion rather than purely political factors And are these distinct drivers or fundamentally interconnected?
Thank you for your questions. I hope you'll be able to hear me. I mean, this is a connections that we are not necessarily able to track within the data set in its current form. I think it's important to remember that most of the violence related to gangs that we have been monitors are indeed taking place in marginalized neighborhoods. But I think that being said, it's important to remember that the mere existence of those gangs, also looking back at Haiti's historical backgrounds, does not also stems from the very deeply rooted connections that those gangs maintain with political and economic figures. They have been exploited over Haiti's histories to serve a political purpose, to secure voting consistencies. So while there might be a connections between the economic situations and fragilities, I also think that we need to be accounting for those these political elites, but also members of Haiti's economic elite who also relies on gangs and these militia to secure their own interests.
So there's parallels in many countries around the world, from Haiti to perhaps Colombia, Sierra Leone, where employment opportunities for youth is one of the key economic opportunities, that has to be revitalized in an economy before some stability can take place. Can you give me your view on what needs to happen in Haiti to provide younger people with an opportunity to actually find employment opportunities? And I thought somebody suggested earlier that there was a plan to sort of do this on a regional basis. Can I get your thoughts on that, Ms. Pellegrini?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think obviously economic stimulations might be, providing further opportunities for Haitian youth, for instance. Difficult to be stimulating Haiti's economy in the current conditions. I mean, at the moment, the movements of individuals within Haiti is essentially obstructed. So how exactly are we actually planning to economic developments? That being said, I think it is definitely a factor, but at the moment we need to be crisis, the current institutional crisis, the lack of legitimacy of the current government. So I see it particularly difficult to achieve given the current security crisis.
We're having some serious difficulties of connectivity here. Mr. Breda, I will just probably wrap up. I've got a couple of minutes left, I believe, to. You have some experience with studying the situation in Colombia. Do you see any parallels between the situation in Colombia and the insurgency that was rooted in lots of rural landlessness and elite capture of the economy? Do you see any parallels here between Colombia and Haiti, and where's the path in your view out of the malaise in Haiti today?
Thank you very much for the question, honorable member. There is certainly similarities in the maybe root causes of, as you were saying, referring to marginalization, great economic inequality, and land probably concentration in the hands of a few. Compared to Colombia, I would say while criminal gangs were used or were created initially to accompany essentially political forces and actors, more alongside what happened with the paramilitary forces in Colombia, we have not seen the development of ideological claims behind these groups. There's been, I think, an attempt by Jimmy Cherizier over recent years to somehow portray the gangs as the defendants of marginalized poor communities, but essentially we're talking about actors that are very much criminal in nature. So happened with the FARC in 2016, this could be solved through negotiations. The conflict could be solved through negotiations. A similar solution, I think, is unlikely to be.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Sorry about this technical difficulty. And now I would like to invite Mr. Zubairi to take the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux partager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Brendan Hanley. And I'd like to begin my questions with Ms. Narayan and UNICEF.
Tous les témoins d'être
Thank
ici.
you to all of the witnesses for joining us on this very important study on Haiti.
With the 880 million call by the UN that was made, and to provide humanitarian assistance within Haiti. As of just a month ago, it's been reported that it's only been 22.1% funded by the Office of the UN High Commissioner, if I am correct. And so with the calls that have been made by UN bodies and the UN for funding, and the lack of funding that has come into the country to address the security situation, the political and humanitarian situation, but what have you seen? Have you seen that these three situations which you outlined have grown in scope and complexity and breadth during your work in Haiti as of 2004?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member, for the question. My short answer is yes. The situation in Haiti has deteriorated since I arrived 2 years ago on every level. And that's independent of the funding situation, because the funding situation for the UN humanitarian agencies pertains to our ability to respond to the crisis. And the crisis is there, whether we can respond or not. It's just, so the two things don't necessarily need to be linked. The situation has deteriorated, as I mentioned, 90% of the capital now under the control of the armed groups, which means that all of us are living and working in this 10%, and then obviously going into the rest of the capital on specific missions in order to deliver humanitarian assistance.
In the next, let's say, 40 seconds, with respect to working under these conditions, with increased gang presence in Port-au-Prince, 90%, as you say, how have you found as a UN employee working within these conditions with the lack of security and situation you find yourself in?
It's been incredibly difficult, to be honest with you, on a personal level and on a professional level. When I visit IDP sites in schools, and the insecurity in the site, around the site, to get to the site, we have to travel in security convoys, we have to travel in armored vehicles, we have a security curfew. Every day we have to check to see, can we go, can we not go? It changes day to day depending on the movements of the armed groups. And sometimes we set out and we have to turn back. So it's an extremely volatile and shifting landscape.
I'll give a little more than 2 minutes I have to my colleague.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this very important meeting. My constituent, Morgan Weinberg, I'd like to turn to you. You didn't get a chance to tell your story, nor will there be time, but Little Footprints, Big Steps works directly with children in reuniting children from abusive orphanage situations. It's incredible work that you do. I wonder if you can tell a little bit more in maybe 40 seconds or so about the importance of this work and orphanage migration.
Thank you, Honorable Member. To really highlight the orphanage issue, over 80% of children living in orphanages do have living families, and the majority of orphanages in Haiti, over 700 orphanages in Haiti, are operating illegally. The current situation in Haiti has increased the risk, first of all, of children becoming separated from their families and being placed in orphanages because of the level of vulnerability of families. And second of all, of the risk of child trafficking occurring through orphanages. In particular, we have orphanages located in and around Port-au-Prince that are relocating due to the violence. However, an already fragile situation of orphanages not closely being monitored is essentially increasing the risk of child trafficking when those orphanages are relocating. And that's also increasing the risk of those children becoming further disconnected from their biological families. So there is currently a need to increase focus on family reunification and the monitoring of orphanages, while also encouraging funds being funneled into the country to truly go through child protection authorities and partners supporting families and communities as opposed to institutions.
Thank you. I don't know if time allows, Mr. Chair, but what I will say is you mentioned, sorry? A few seconds. You did mention rural food production, and I wonder if you would be able to submit to the committee your recommendations on how Canada can help support regional and rural agricultural production, because this is also such an important element where Canada can play a role. Thank you.
Please, 10 to 15 second maximum answer, please.
Okay, I believe this is an opportunity within the crisis to truly build the agricultural industry in Haiti, for which there is extreme potential. With the amount of internally displaced families relocated to rural regions of Haiti, it's the perfect opportunity to help provide the supplies and materials for those individuals to invest in crops in the area, and also with the opportunity to address famine through that food production, because those rural areas are blocked off from the main routes through which food was typically transported.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Mr. Alexis Brunel-Dissep for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses who are here for this very important study. Ms. Narayan, Ms. Davidson, I'd like for you to tell us about the current state of malnutrition for children and the health crisis in Haiti right now. I imagine you have some data for us on that.
Member, if I may speak in English, I hope that's okay. I do have some data on the status of malnutrition in Haiti. It's not good, as you would expect. The numbers we have, 294,000 children are at risk of acute malnutrition this year, and that includes 130 children under 5 with severe acute malnutrition. We estimate that 1 in 5 children under 5 suffer from stunting, which means that they're too short for their age. And about 5% of children under 5 were acutely malnourished in 2022. That's the most recent year for that data. In water, 3.5 million people need WASH services, water and sanitation services. 71% of Haitians do not have access to basic sanitation as of 2024. And the last one I'll share with you is that approximately 18% of Haitians still practice open defecation as of 2023. So it's a very dire situation.
Merci pour ces données-là.
Thank you for those statistics. There are a number of people who are wondering, for example, Canada sends money for humanitarian aid. It goes through major organizations like UNICEF, the World Food Program. How can we ensure that that money that is sent goes directly on the ground? There are small organizations sometimes, organizations through churches that do fundraisers. But when we give to UNICEF, when we give to the World Food Program, can we rest assured that that money is being used on the ground? Is there some accountability?
For the question. So for UNICEF and organizations like the World Food Program, we have in place a number of systems, including monitoring systems on the ground. So when we are trusted with Canadian funding, and I use that word intentionally because we do feel a sense of trust that you have put in us. When we are entrusted with this funding, we are supporting government institutions, local non-governmental organizations, and we are doing direct implementation as UNICEF. This means that we can ensure that quality standards are respected, for example, when it comes to water and sanitation, and it ensures that we can continue the follow-up monitoring. So we go to communities. I have visited water points that we are constructing in rural parts of Haiti. I have seen myself on these visits along with my team. We have engineers on staff who go and look at the technical aspects, for example. So we are actively following up on how the funds that are given to us, how they are implemented around the country.
Et avec les enjeux de sécurité,
And with the security issues, it becomes a significant issue to use that money. How can it be used concretely on the ground? Because you have workers for UNICEF. It's not easy to ensure that they're safe. So how do you deal with security issues to make sure that the money provides concrete results on the ground?
We are not able to go as UN staff that we cannot access because of insecurity. We use third-party monitors. So we hire local companies or organizations, Haitians by and large, who are able to go and access the communities if we ourselves are not able to go. And we're also very opportunistic. Sometimes we're able to access a particular commune or district today, or tomorrow, but not today. And so if we're able to go, we go. I have 2 offices in the field, so in the north and the south, in addition to the main office in Port-au-Prince. And so those sub-offices are the ones doing the monitoring in their respective districts. So it's a combination of us going when we can, and when we cannot, we use the third-party monitors that we have hired, and we've trained them so they know what to look for from a technical perspective.
à quel point les coûts...
And at what point do the cuts in humanitarian aid, and it's happening all over the world, we've seen it with USAID, but there are also a number of European countries that have cut their funding for humanitarian aid, and Japan as well, and Germany. But there's also Canada, who has cut its international funding for humanitarian purposes in the last budget. So what is the impact? You mentioned the organizations that you work with, the small NGOs that are in the field that do very concrete work because they are very close to the locals there in the country. So when does the impact of the cut in humanitarian aid happen? How do you see it? Sorry, a very short answer, please, because we're over by 40 seconds.
It is reducing our ability to respond. I don't believe that we can do more with less. I think that's fooling ourselves. So I think we have to be honest and say with less money, we can deliver less. We have to be realistic. That is the reality. We're reaching fewer children, doing less.
Merci, Madame. Maintenant, j'invite Madame.
Thank you. And now I would like to ask Ms. Vanberg to take the floor. 5 minutes.
It's very alarming what's happening with particularly the children. I just want to ask my first question of Morgan, because I know that in the past when you were here, you talked about the youth that were being recruited into the gangs. And in your opening remarks, you basically referred to them as child soldiers. And I just wanted to make that connection, because when we listen to the security situation and some of the geopolitics around Haiti, we're not seeing those children, and they are children. So maybe I could ask Morgan to comment on that, but I'd also like to hear from Gita Narayan as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Yes. With Little Footprints, Big Steps, we do work with street children in particular, and what we're seeing is a lot of street children being forcibly recruited into armed gangs. And although it is dangerous, we have also worked with children who've then escaped those gangs. And these are young children being given guns and told where to go and what to do. This is extremely traumatizing for children and also for the future of the country. So it is possible, as what UNICEF also shared, to reintegrate those children into their communities. However, I believe prevention is also critically important. So, we're focusing on getting those children out of the streets and back into their families. But the level of vulnerability of families is ultimately what sends children to the streets. So it all comes down to helping families survive.
Narayan, the work you're doing on the ground is incredible, and I know that people that are doing this work, particularly with the UN, are doing a tremendous service. So I do want to thank you for that. But if you could also talk about the recruitment of the children into the gangs.
Yes, absolutely. So we are seeing, as I mentioned, a 200% increase in just 1 year. And one of the sad stories actually is because we have reintegrated 600 children in the last 2 years, as I mentioned. There's a tremendous stigma associated with these children associated with the armed groups. And the society generally doesn't see them as victims first and foremost, and yet they are. Even a child who joins, quote unquote, voluntarily, that's not really a choice that they're making. They have been forced into joining the armed group to protect their family, economic reasons, coming back to the earlier question from the other honorable member. So I think we have to also recognize that there is societal stigma that we have to overcome in order to ensure these children are fully reintegrated and can become productive members of Haitian society again.
Thank you. I'll share my time with Mr. Zuberi.
Thanks. And just to continue with you, Ms. Narayan, I want to, you mentioned that Canada, if I heard you correctly in your opening, that Canada is supporting 32 million, some of your projects, is that right?
Yes,
okay.
Historically,
and can you describe that project in a bit more detail?
So Canada has provided funding to UNICEF in Haiti to support health, malnutrition, cholera, and now child protection. The current project, which is 8 million Canadian dollars, is the Pré Jeune program, which specifically targets children who are vulnerable to recruitment and the children already in the armed groups, but who we want to support to exit and to reintegrate back into their families and their communities. It's a new project. It just was signed 2 months ago, and it's a 3-year project, $8 million, and we anticipate that it will lead to hundreds of children exiting the groups and being reintegrated, and thousands being prevented from joining in the first place.
Excellent. With respect to impacts of these programs, what have you seen so far, the tangible impacts? Can you describe them? Well, you did a bit already, but can you go into it a bit more, these and other programs?
Sure. I mean, it's concrete. You know, I have seen children in an IDP, in an internally displaced site, where they're being screened for malnutrition. And if the child is malnourished, receiving immediate therapeutic food, which was provided by funding from the Government of Canada, it is instant. And that child would not have received that therapeutic food or even been screened if it hadn't been for this support. We have mobile clinics that go from camp to provide health and nutrition services, such as the malnutrition screening. When it comes to child protection, children who escape the armed groups, they have gone through so much trauma. They are damaged. And so the support that we provide, again with Canadian funding, allows these children to laugh again and to have hope, to have access to learning, and to eventually be reunited with their families.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zubairi. Now I invite Mr. Majumdar to take the floor for 5 minutes.
Actually, I'm going to offer it to my colleague, Ms. Cronus. She'll take the first question.
In the second round? No,
would you like to continue, Fred?
Yeah, you should continue.
I think you should continue.
Or then you should go, because I'm in the second. I want to do the Cuba one.
Fred, it's over to you.
No, go ahead. Do you have anything?
So we skip?
No, we don't have to skip. Fred, do you want it?
Ms. Davidson or Ms. Narayan, the statistics are staggering. 90% of Port-au-Prince is estimated under gang control. I mean, the question the answer can't be simple, but where do we go from here? If 90% of Port-au-Prince is controlled by gangs, how can this ever be resolved? And what are the top 3 things that you would suggest need to happen for the resolution?
I think we have an opportunity, Honourable Member, right now, because we have the gang suppression force that, of which Canada is one of the contributing states. We have the gang suppression force now taking shape in Port-au-Prince. We have 750, 800 Chadian troops that have arrived, and they will begin operations shortly, along with other troops.
Sorry, just interrupt. You said Chadian troops, so
yes.
there are multinational interventions happening on the ground?
Yes. At the moment, the largest number of troops is from Chad. That's the largest
Are
contingent.
there any other countries contributing resources?
I believe that Guatemala is contributing. I believe also that Sri Lanka may be contributing. It changes. I don't have the exact number of, or the exact names of the countries, but Chad is on the ground right now.
And are they making any progress?
They have started operations in a low-key way with the Haitian National Police, and I think that's what needs to happen, is the gang suppression force needs to be given the opportunity to function. They need the resources, the manpower, they need to be able to function, but to function in a way that is in line with international child protection standards. We know that children make up 30 to 50% of the armed groups. So if you think about the military operations, children are on the front lines and face a high risk of being casualties. So first, though, we need to reestablish security through the gang suppression force. That's the first thing. The second thing is what next? In the areas that are, quote unquote, liberated by the GSF, what happens? We need to ensure that support is coming into those areas. People need to see that there's an alternative to living under the control of the armed groups. Systems need to be put in place. Schools have to open. Water has to be provided. Hospitals have to be functional. And that's where the UN and other partners come in. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is reconciliation. Haiti is a divided, fragmented country right now after years of conflict by the armed groups. How do you heal a country? How do you make them come together? Honestly, the World Cup at the moment is helping a lot because Haiti, as you know, is in the World Cup for the first time in 53 years. But this is what is needed. We need to bring the country together and go forward towards elections as soon as possible.
Is there any movement at the senior governmental levels to recognize that change has to take place, or are the elites still sort of effectively in control?
I think it's both. I think the elites are still effectively in control. However, the Prime Minister and other members of Cabinet are very committed to holding elections as soon as conditions allow. I think this year is unlikely. That's my personal view, just given the current situation. And again, the gang suppression force has to stabilize in order for elections to take place. There is a commitment to holding the elections as soon as possible.
So the multinational organizations that are on the ground helping this process through, have they made a long-term commitment to this? Because we've seen instances in the past where countries have intervened, provided services, and then left, and then chaos is recreated. Are there long-term commitments from multinational organizations to stick with the task?
I mean, for the UN, and I can speak for UNICEF, we are there. We're not going anywhere. I mean, our funding may decrease, and so we may have to reduce activities, as I've mentioned earlier, but UNICEF is there. We will be there as long as we are needed, as long as children need us. And I think the rest of the UN feels the same. The UN mission, as you know, is renewed every year by a mandate of the UN Security Council, and so that's an annual a confirmation or renewal of its mandate. It's a 1 year at a time. So their mandate changes with each resolution of the Security Council. At the moment, their mandate focuses quite strongly, obviously, on the elections, the political situation, as well as community violence reduction and disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. J'invite M. Alexis Brunet-Duceppe pour
I will now ask Mr. Alexis Brunet-Duceppe to take the floor. Thank you, Chair. I would like to know, because that is your expertise, I would like to know how much children are affected by gang recruiting in Haiti. Because we see an awful lot of newspaper articles on the topic where we hear that the children are the first victims, but they are also the first to be recruited. So there's a paradox there, I think. So perhaps you could give us some insight based on your expertise.
Things are true. So children make up 30 to 50% of the armed groups, so up to half. And they are joining the armed groups in different ways. They are kidnapped or abducted to join in some cases. In other cases, they are threatened to join. Their families may be threatened. If you don't join, your family will be attacked and killed, etc. Sometimes the child joins because the home life has become very violent. Haitian families are breaking down for a number of reasons. And so the family is not a safe place, so the child is on the street. The child runs away from the family, is on the street, becomes very vulnerable to recruitment. In other cases, the child sees no other option. The gangs offer, through social media, a very attractive, a very sexy life in the sense of, come join us, we will have money, you will be in control, we'll give you a gun, you will have power, etc., etc. So social media is a very persuasive recruitment tactic for children, and they don't know any better, right? You're 10 years old and it looks good and you go, and then you realize what is happening. So multiple ways that children end up joining the armed groups.
En fait, c'était pas le bon mot que j'ai utilisé quand je parlais.
I don't think I used the right word when I used the word paradox. It's double victimization, in fact. But in UNICEF, you've seen this elsewhere. There are child soldiers, even when it's an organized armed group, and some government organizations in Africa have used child soldiers as well. So you've seen this before. And that expertise that UNICEF has with regard to how children are recruited for armed gangs or for military efforts, can that help you with what's going on in Haiti and how to counter it? Yes, we do. We have experts from UNICEF who have worked in Africa, for example, who support us in Haiti. But Haiti is a unique situation. One of my colleagues was saying that like the gangs are not motivated by ideology. It's not any kind of ideology, so we have to adapt our approach for children who are associated with these armed groups. I also wanted to clarify the terminology. At UNICEF, we no longer say child soldiers. We say children associated with armed groups, because when we say associated, it's far broader, and it includes children who have to spy and who do other tasks. Because when we say child soldier, we are talking about children who have the weapons themselves. But there are children who work in the camps, who are sexually exploited, other things like that. So in Haiti, there's all of these children who are stigmatized because of their association with the armed groups and the gangs. So that's what we use. It's a lot longer. It's harder to use, but it's a more accurate reflection of the reality of those children. Yes. Do I have a little bit more time left? I have 1.5 minutes left. Okay, good. So now I would like to continue.
We've studied Haiti a lot at this committee and at the Foreign Affairs Committee. There's the elephant in the room. If tomorrow morning we resolved the issue of munitions and arms heading to the island, that would resolve nearly 90% of the problem, in the sense that armed groups would no longer have access to weapons and ammunition and wouldn't be able to sow terror. The power they have currently comes directly from the fact that they have access to weapons. 95% of those weapons come from the United States of America. Do you talk about this? Is your organization aware? Even if it's not your main expertise, you're on the ground. Could you tell the committee about your knowledge on this? Is it true when it said that if this issue was resolved, if weapons weren't heading to the island, a large part of the problem would be solved? A big part, but not the whole part.
Solve 95% of the problem. Yes, it's contributing to the problem, but as one of the honorable members said earlier,
95% du problème, c'est que
95% of the security problem.
Security problem is linked to the socioeconomic problem as well. Haiti is a country of tremendous poverty and tremendous inequities. And when you look at the gang leaders of today, they come from the most disadvantaged areas of Port-au-Prince, Croix de Bouquet, Cité Soleil, and they were children, they were young people 5-7 years ago, and they are now the leaders of the gangs. Okay. And so it is not only a security problem in the sense of arms and weapons. There is the economic motivation. There is also the weak governance and the lack of accountability exercised by the justice system, for example. And
merci,
so
Madame. Merci.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all the witnesses. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for your good introduction, answer to question. And if you see or if you feel there is something you would like to add to this subcommittee, you could address in writing either to me or to the clerk. Thanks a lot. And now we suspend for a few seconds. We start the meeting, please. On commence la séance.
We will resume the meeting.
Okay. Bienvenue à nos témoins.
Welcome to our witnesses.
For the benefits of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the micro icon to activate your mic and please mute yourself while you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom for the screen, you can select appropriate channel, floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à
I would
notre...
like to now welcome our second panel of witnesses.
From Human Rights in Cuba, we're studying the human rights in Cuba. We have from Canadian Network on Cuba, Samantha Hislop, co-chair by video conference. From Cuban Observatory of Human Rights, Mr. Alejandro Gonzalez, Executive Director, also by video conference. From Prisoner Defenders, we have Mr. Javier Larondo, President by video conference. Every one of you have the floor for 4 minutes for introduction, please. Try to keep the time because we had a vote. We don't have enough time. Thank you. I would like to start with Madame Samantha Hislop to take the floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and honorable members for the opportunity. The Canadian Network on Cuba is an umbrella organization with thousands of members across Canada. Our network also works with Canadian trade unions, student organizations, faith and advocacy and peace groups, and other mass organizations that care deeply about defending the basic human rights of the Cuban people. The right to sovereignty, self-determination, territorial integrity, healthcare, education, clean drinking water, food, housing, and peace. One of our leading contributors is the Cuban Diaspora Civil Society Organization, the Juan Goberto Gomez Association of Cuban Residents in Canada, who for many years have been trying to call the attention of the government of Canada to the deteriorating conditions in Cuba caused by the United States policies toward the island. The Canadian Network on Cuba's expertise working with the Cuban people goes back decades. Every single one of our members are volunteers who advocate for the end of the illegal United States blockade against Cuba because we have family members and friends on the island who have been suffering under these coercive illegal measures for almost 7 decades. There are repeated talking points around a desire for Cuba to open up its economy, but it had begun this process over 30 years ago. What prevents most investment in Cuba are U.S. sanctions and the associated risks to third countries and companies, resulting in overcompliance to avoid penalties. The most recent U.S. measures have caused a swift capital flight, which has seen multiple Canadian companies leave Cuba. And if this is not a case where Canada's Foreign Extraterritorial Measures Act should be invoked, we are not sure what is. While airlines from the U.S. and other countries continue flying to Cuba, the lack of direct flights to Canada are a significant component of the most recent and severe iteration of the U.S. blockade against the people of Cuba. The United States has not only been engaging in economic warfare against Cuba since 1960, but it has also been behind terrorist attacks against Cuba, and it has been organizing, funding, and sustaining opposition on the island to the tune of millions of dollars annually on regime change efforts and political interference in Cuba, which it funnels through so-called independent media and NGOs. The work and intentions of the Canadian Network on Cuba stands in stark contrast to many of these so-called NGOs who claim to be defending human rights of Cubans while advocating in favor of the U.S. blockade, which is preventing their development and killing them. We're very concerned that individuals from these types of organizations are repeatedly invited to give testimony on the humanitarian situation and human rights in Cuba, when the focus must be on the United States as the human rights violator and oppressor of the Cuban people. This year, since the implementation of the near-total economic siege of Cuba by the U.S. via fuel blockade and even more comprehensive extraterritorial measures, our material aid to Cuba has significantly increased. As a civil society organization with no paid resources or government assistance, we've sent aid valuing over $8 million, such as medical supplies, food, and energy supplies, and this work is ongoing. Unfortunately, right now, we have containers of aid sitting in Cuba at the ports in Mariel and Santiago de Cuba stranded because there is no fuel to distribute it. There is no logical or honest argument that can be made that U.S. sanctions against Cuba are not the sole direct cause of the humanitarian crisis that Cuba is facing right now. And this has been completely engineered by the United States, who have totally weaponized energy against Cuba to lay the groundwork of what it admits would be a takeover of Cuba. The U.S. fuel blockade means food cannot be brought to market. People are not receiving
20 seconds remain.
Okay. The intent of the United States blockade against Cuba is to create terrible conditions for the Cuban people through economic sanctions in the hopes that they will blame and overthrow their government. And this is openly discussed by U.S. politicians. This is overt political interference and collective punishment, using the engineered suffering of the Cuban people as a cudgel to try to impose changes in Cuba that benefit United States finance capital and the wealthy extremist exile community who do not care at all about the well-being of Cubans and would like to see a recolonization. Any discussion on human rights in Cuba must begin with the U.S. blockade. Thank you, Chair.
Now I invite Mr. Alejandro Gonzalez take the floor for 4 minutes, please. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Sí, por favor. Señor Presidente.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I appear before this House today to speak about something fundamental, the dignity of people who, for more than 6 decades, have lived under a regime that has made fear its method of governance and silence its instrument of power. I'd like to begin with the facts, if I may. In 2025, we documented 3,179 politically motivated acts of repression in Cuba. In other words, every 24 hours, at least 8 actions are carried out against the rights and freedoms of a Cuban citizen. These include arbitrary arrests, beatings, fines, and restrictions preventing individuals from leaving their homes. These are for political and conscience-related reasons. What crime did they commit? There's connection problems again, and this is a health and safety issue for our interpreters.
Moi, je fais juste dire ça.
I have to point this out. I am telling you because I'm hearing it in my headset, and then you can check with the interpreters and make the decision. But I wanted you to know that that's what I'm hearing in my headset.
Continue, please.
¿Qué delito cometieron estas personas?
What crime have these people committed? None. They simply exercised their peaceful right to express themselves, to demonstrate, or to think differently. All of them were convicted without the guarantee of due process and by judges affiliated with the Communist Party who followed the dictates of the political police. In 2025, we also documented at least 875 violations of religious freedom, while the state continued to deny legal recognition to hundreds of independent religious movements. This not only constitutes a violation of freedom of association, but also hinders the humanitarian work these communities carry out on behalf of the poorest and most vulnerable members of society. Furthermore, our 8th report on the state of social rights, published in 2025 and based on more than 1,300 interviews conducted across 70 municipalities throughout the island, documents an unprecedented social catastrophe. Today, 89% of Cuban families live in extreme poverty. 7 out of 10 Cubans acknowledge having gone without food at some point due to shortages. Among the elderly, the situation is even more heartbreaking. 8 out of 10 people over the age of 61 have had to forego breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Only 15 out of every 100 households have consistent access to safe drinking water. Faced with such hopelessness, 78% of Cubans want to emigrate. Entire generations no longer dream of building their country, they dream of escaping it. And all of this has occurred while the ruling elite has continued to conduct business around the world, with its conglomerate accumulating assets estimated at $18 billion in assets, figures that the U.S. Department of State places at as much as $20 billion. Honorable members, there's a truth that this committee must hear honestly. We did not arrive at this situation solely because of the will of the oppressors. We also got to this point because governments in the free world for decades chose to sign agreements, extend credit, or receive the perpetrators with state honors. Every handshake normalized the dictatorship and became the message was cut off. I agree with the Cuban-Canadian coalition when it states the message was cut off. Likewise, I can say that when I was unjustly imprisoned for promoting a civic initiative that was fully grounded in law, every gesture of international solidarity was, for me and my family, a breath of fresh air and a reaffirmation of my human dignity. Therefore, I urge this Parliament to explicitly recognize the existence of political prisoners in Cuba and to demand their immediate and unconditional release. The sound is cut off. I would like to allow, if I may, one final request, which is also a matter of justice. Sooner or later, Cuba will be free. And the victims of the Castro regime will have the right to reparation. I therefore invite this Parliament and all governments that for decades sustained, financed, or legitimized the regime to contribute to the creation of an international reparations fund for the victims of the Cuban regime. Those who supported the regime when it was putting its own citizens into prison will need to do something that goes beyond words and show concrete acts of reparation. A freedom that does not repair the harm suffered by its victims remains incomplete. Cubans are not asking for charity. They are asking for the very same principles that you defend every day here in this committee, the right to choose those who govern them, the right to live in freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now I would like to invite Mr. Javier Larondo to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, honorable members. World Prison Brief reports 90,000 prisoners, 1% of Cuba's population, and Prisoners Defenders verifies 1,000, including 34 condemned minors, even in maximum security prisons among adult criminals. Many are mothers forcibly deprived of their children. In UN arbitrary detention victims, over twice Venezuela, 3 times Nicaragua or Mexico. And fourth, in enforced disappearance UN urgent actions. The United Nations repeatedly condemned Cuba's structural due process violations. Prosecutors in prison without oversight. Defense lawyers depend on the Minister of Justice. Courts, prosecutors, and lawyers are politically controlled. Defense expert evidence is barred. Fundamental rights are criminalized. All penal figures are vaguely defined. Civilians face summary military courts. All are confirmed by 6 special rapporteurs and other UN bodies. 11,000 people not counted as political prisoners are in prison without a crime, pre-crime, as prone to destabilize social order. Among political prisoners, 449 suffer serious medical conditions from hunger, ill treatment, repression, and denial of care. 52 others have severe pre-existing mental disorders, all untreated. Average daily prison rations of under 300 kilocalories, less than 15% of survival needs. Families bring food, and guards left with custody-developed cancer, hepatitis, and Auschwitz-like malnutrition. Political prisoners are being adopted findings from almost 200 random political prisoners cases we documented. All were tortured. 80 Jonathan Torres Farad, 17 years old, suffered 15 patterns. 60,000 inmates produced charcoal sold in Canada and Europe as eco-friendly and Habano cigars. 14 hours a day, weekends included, in under 75 cigar quotas. Had to acknowledge it. In 1959, many believed Cuba chose democracy. Fraud led to a communist, Stalinist, and Soviet system. Faced 8 years in prison if quitting, as confirmed and condemned by the UN and the IAC. Been hell, not paradise. Sanctions do not justify regime crimes against humanity, as they are set to punish the crimes. In 2021, Cubans peacefully took to the streets shouting Patria and Vida and freedom, and over 2,500 prosecutions. Do Cubans have a real chance against this tyranny? None. That is anymore. The Universal Declaration's supreme right to revelry against tyranny is impossible for Cubans, but Canada can exercise the responsibility with every possible force in coordination with the United States to secure the best and fastest change in Cuba. Thank you very, very much, members.
OK, point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. So I hope that it went well for our interpreters. I think it's because they had the text, that's why they were able to continue. But now, with question and answer, for the next few minutes, it will be far more difficult for the interpreters to be able to do their work because the sound will be cutting out and they don't have the text in front of them. And I wanted to raise that because I know that these are people who are unionized and who have the right to a safe workplace. And right now, unfortunately, because of technology, that is perhaps not the case. So I would ask you to be very vigilant about that. And I would also ask our friends, the interpreters, that if it's not possible to continue, don't worry, we stop. Very good. Let us know. Thank you.
First and last round of question and answer. I would like to invite Madame Cronis to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. You're welcome. I would like to thank all of the witnesses for being here with us today. And Mr. Gonzalez, what are the most urgent humanitarian needs that Cuban have right now? And where could Canada's support truly make a difference immediately?
Please unmute yourself.
And you might want to ask him to speak slowly.
Sí, el pueblo cubano ahora mismo tiene.
Right now, the Cuban people have many, many needs for medication, for food. The situation that Cuba is in right now is extremely serious and severe. There's no fuel, there's no electricity, and there's no power, and the country is simply not functioning. There is no way of distributing the food that does arrive on the island. I think that what would be most helpful from anyone who's sending anything to Cuba is to send medication. I would suggest that this be done in ways that are alternative to giving it to the government. So I think that it's important to find ways of getting food to the Cuban people and other things like medication, hygiene products as well. The health situation and health care situation has gone downhill in Cuba, and there has to be an effort to try to improve it.
Cederé el resto de mi tiempo a mi
I will give the
colega.
rest of my time to my colleague for Calgary Heritage.
In the short time we have left, Javier Larondo, your commentary was cut a little short through technical difficulties. And so I wanted to ask the question, I think you'll have a couple of minutes to respond, to the question that I think was interrupted a bit, which was, what is your view, generally speaking, on the current stance Canada and the United States take or could take in regards to providing assistance to Cuba, to holding the regime accountable, helping the people, and helping transition toward a free Cuba?
Sí, pues en primer lugar,
So
lo más
first of all, the most important in terms of humanitarian aid is that it not go into the hands of the government. If it goes to the government, it will be sold, sound is cutting out, in dollars. So it's very important to use the channels that are being used now. The Catholic Church, for example, and Caritas, as the United States are doing. Furthermore, with the United States, you could have Caritas and the Church have more infrastructure. That is to say, freezers, fridges, transportation systems, so they can provide more food to all of Cuba. That's essential.
salida, porque Cuba está absolutamente...
Because Cuba is absolutely...
Tiene 90.000 presos, que es el 1% de la población.
1% of the population. There are...
Tiene 11.000 en predelictiva, pero además...
11,000 are in pre-custody. So Cuba has a massive repression issue where new political prisoners are put in prison all the time. And so the regime needs to understand that it needs to change or transition. And the only thing that counts for the regime is that it be done in public, not in private. So there needs to be strong pressure on the regime with those who do it like the United States. So Canada and the United States having an alliance would be very positive because you would have the opportunity to influence that pressure so that it would be of a nature that you would like more. Sometimes there's criticism. So intervene with pressure. Never by sending goods to the regime, which would keep them and keep themselves in power.
Thank you. I invite Mr. Zubairi to take the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here around this important study. I would like to start with Mr. Gonzalez and pick up on a theme that has already been asked in questions, but also with respect to humanitarian aid. Do you have any ideas on how we can make sure that it goes to the people who have it, anything in addition to what has been said so far?
La realidad en Cuba es que...
The reality in Cuba is that the day-to-day is complex. But there needs to be alternative ways with independent civil society.
Crearse algunas, digamos, redes de
There
distribución.
needs to be distribution networks. It's important.
Talk about those distribution networks that cut out a little bit.
Sí, digo.
Yes.
Porque yo soy parte de lo que dice Larrondo.
Because I echo what Mr. Larrondo said. You can't give the aid directly to the regime because the regime would sell it in dollars to the people.
Un poco más en las It's cutting a bit out. So I'm gonna continue with the witness who had the best line. Miss Hislop, I'd like to take the remainder of my little more than 2 minutes with you. You spoke a bit about the humanitarian situation in Cuba. What's been happening in terms of alleviating the situation as of recent? Has there been any developments in this calendar year to address that situation? You spoke about poverty, hunger, etc.
Yes, on the part of the Cuban government, there has been a massive deployment with the help of other countries, especially China, to set up solar-powered, to power public facilities, polyclinics, hospitals, maternity clinics, children's homes with solar power. Mexico has been providing a lot of direct aid, at least 5 ships. Other countries are also working through Mexico to send aid. And the Canadian Network on Cuba, as I said, has sent $8 million worth of aid so far. We do send it through the Cuban government. This lie is repeated over and over again by people from NGOs that receive funding from the U.S. State Department. We don't. And I can say that there's a total lack of verifiable evidence that aid gets diverted to dollar stores. There's never been a proven chain of custody where that has happened. And I really think we need to stop putting these political conditions when we're providing aid to Cuba, because that becomes complying with the U.S. sanctions and undermining the Cuban government, and that the goal ultimately is to try to destabilize the Cuban government.
This is a really brief study, and so normally we have more time to dive into things from different angles. So without getting into the reasons of what's happened in terms of countries that are starting things, but I think my time is actually running out, unfortunately. One more minute. I just want to continue with you, and I appreciate what you said in your comments. I'm not taking away from what you did just say, but if you can just spell out more the effects and impacts on the ground with respect to hunger, famine, cost of living. If you can talk about those human impacts on the ground. Would you be able to continue with that point, please, Ms. Hislop?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
There, in the past, I would say in the past 2 years especially, there's been a severe noticeable lack of medications. My own family is affected by that. Families have to buy their medicine in another country because there's nothing in the pharmacy. It's simply not there. And the Cuba's own biopharmaceutical industry can only now produce about 30% of the medicines they used to be able to that are guaranteed to the population, because they can't access the raw materials. So medicine is very important, as is food aid. And with the loss of tourism to Cuba now this year, a lot of people are out of work. There's a lack of foreign currency coming in. Private businesses are severely affected. So people don't have money to purchase food. It's very difficult.
Thank you, Ms. Hislop. And now, j'invite M. Brunel-Duceppe.
I invite Mr. Brunel-Duceppe to have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to all of the witnesses. Thank you for joining us today on this important study. Ms. Hislop, I have a little bit of a hard time understanding the arguments of some people who tell us there's never been such a bad humanitarian crisis for the Cuban people, but at the same time, they say it's the fault of the regime. But the crisis happening now, I've been to Russia and China. I stand up for human rights. But the crisis before us now, which is making the Cuban people suffer now, from a totally objective point of view, it's directly related to the American blockade on energy, or am I mistaken?
It's absolutely, completely directly caused by the U.S. blockade against Cuba. The UN has reported this. They just came out last week with a report, and they've warned that the expansions of these sanctions that are imposed on Cuba are causing widespread harm to the population, and it's endangering lives, and the sanctions must be lifted immediately. Businesses are over-complying due to the risks and the threats by the United States. And, every sector, energy, finance, and shipping are being affected by this now. And when you also factor in Cuba's total isolation from international payment systems, Cuba is at risk of widespread suffering and disease in the very near future. And this is because of the U.S. blockade.
And
Canada committed to acting in partnership with Mexico to provide aid to the Cuban people. Mexico now is at its 6th delivery of humanitarian aid to Cuba. Canada hasn't. Money has been sent to UNICEF, the World Food Program, which is good, but in terms of humanitarian aid sent directly, we're not at all at the same level as Mexico. And yet, Mexico and Canada are negotiating tariffs with the United States. So the reason stated for why Canada hasn't sent humanitarian aid can't be because of negotiations with the United States if Mexico is doing so. So am I mistaken by saying that Canada is a laggard in humanitarian aid compared to Mexico currently?
That's absolutely the same assessment that we would have. We're very disappointed in the Canadian government's standing by idly and basically silently in what's happening. And like you said, Mexico is in the same vulnerable position that Canada is in, maybe more so. And they're actually a global leader right now in the humanitarian aid that and they have offered to be a humanitarian corridor for this aid to go through. And they've also offered to allow our airlines to refuel in Mexico if necessary to continue flying to the United States. Only Canada abruptly stopped flying to the to Cuba. The United States still has multiple airlines and other countries as well. So we should be doing a lot more. Other countries are working through Mexico, and I think we should too. Canada needs to step up and lead. Otherwise, we're complicit in what's happening.
Le Canada, c'est quand même un des plus gros producteurs.
Canada is one of the largest producers globally of oil. It might not be a good thing because I'm an environmentalist, but the fact is that it's true. And that being said, I think it goes against international law for the United States to impose sanctions on a country that has bilateral relations, as Canada does with Cuba. So imposing sanctions on Canada because it would send oil to Cuba would violate international law. But I think the worst consequence of all of this is that the Cuban government heads towards Russia, for example, because we don't want to sell or give oil to Cuba. Cuba turns to alternatives that are not necessarily the most respectable countries. But if there's no choice, that's what happens. Do you agree with me that it's a very bad idea to prevent Canada from providing oil to Cuba?
Of course, it's a complicity. It's giving up our own sovereignty as an independent country with the right to have bilateral relations with Cuba, as we have had uninterrupted for more than 80 years now. Cuba has always been a very good partner to Canada, and they do everything on the basis of mutual respect and mutual benefit. And there is a lot of opportunity right now for Canada to invest in infrastructure and development projects, get tourism going again. Even in the biopharma industry and scientific research, Cuba is a world leader in that. There are medical breakthroughs, a new Alzheimer's treatment, cancer vaccines, all of these things that Cuba has developed despite its lack of resources that Canada could be working with Cuba on right now. It's a missed opportunity, putting aside the fact that we don't want to be complicit in what the United States is doing to Cuba right now and to the Cuban people. This is a time for Canada to take a different path and do the right thing and take a mutually beneficial step and maintain the ties between our two countries that we have had for more than 8 decades.
Thank you, Ms. Hislop, and time is out. I would like to thank all our witnesses. Merci à vous toutes et tous.
Thank you all for your testimony. This is the meeting and the study on human rights in the Caribbean region.
The staff is here, and we would like to thank you. And if you feel that some more information you would like to supply it to the subcommittee, you could write it either to the chair or to the clerk. Thanks a lot, and I wish you all the best. And for all my colleagues here, I believe this is going to be our last meeting for this session. I wish you well. I thank you all, and I hope you're going to enjoy good time with your family and loved one this summer. For all the staff, interpreter, and everyone here, thank you.